and welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and I am putting together a special video series this month in honor of Pride Month. So every day this month I hope to have a special video coming out talking about a different LGBTQIA+ identity, whether that's a sexual orientation, a romantic orientation, or a gender identity. We're going to be talking about all of those things this month, and I hope that it will be really educational for you guys. So as many of you know, Pride Month is celebrated during the month of June. In the United States, June is designated as Pride Month here, and in some other countries as well. I live in the United States, and I assume that's where a majority of my viewers will be coming to me from as well. So we'll primarily be talking about American culture or Western culture in these videos, but Pride is for everyone, and these videos are for everyone. So June is designated as Pride Month here in the US, and so it's a great time to celebrate different LGBTQIA+ identities, to celebrate the LGBTQ+ community, to raise awareness about different identities, to provide educational resources, to celebrate and assess the progress we've made this last year and throughout history in achieving rights for LGBTQIA+ people. And it's also a great time to sort of assess what still needs to be done, where we need to go from here as well. But it's, just a great time, I think, for celebrating, for reflecting, for education and awareness. So I'm putting together this video series as an educational resource and as an awareness tool as well. So I hope it will be helpful for everyone. Pride, the whole month of June, Pride is for everybody, but oftentimes people will pick a particular day to really celebrate a particular identity. So every day this month I hope to have a video talking about a particular identity, hopefully, fingers crossed. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what sexual orientation is itself, and then we'll also be talking about what it means to be gay, or the gay identity, the G in LGBTQ+. I hope that these videos will really be helpful to people who are hoping to learn about the LGBTQIA+ community, maybe people who are questioning their own identities, whether someone has just come out to you and you want to learn more about what this, identity that they, just described to you means, or maybe you are trying to sort out what your own identity is, or you heard about something on TV or read about it online and you want to know more. Or maybe you just in general would like to be more educated about the LGBTQIA+ community. These videos are for you, and I hope that they will be helpful. So without further ado, let's get started with our topic today. I've got my little notes down here in my lap, so you might see me looking down at my notes once in a while just to make sure that I'm talking about all the things that I want to talk about in this video today. But let's get started. Okay, so let's start by talking about what sexual orientation is, right? So sexual orientation relates to who you're sexually attracted to. It's a label that defines who you want to have a sexual relationship with, who you experience sexual attraction to. So, what gender or genders you experience sexual attraction to, if any at all. Sexual orientation, it refers both to a pattern of attraction as well as an identity a person uses based on those attractions, and a membership in a particular community of other people with similar attractions, okay? So that might sound like a lot, so let's break it down a little bit. To put it simply, sexual orientation describes both who you experience sexual attraction to, so what gender or genders you experience sexual attraction to, if any, as well as describing an identity that a person uses to designate or describe what gender or genders they experience sexual attraction to, if any. So it's both sort of like a description and an identity. No one knows for sure what causes a person to have a particular sexual orientation. It's generally agreed upon that it is both a combination of biological factors as well as social cultural factors as well. So it's basically it's nature and nurture, right? So there's definitely genetic and biological components, but there's also going to be social cultural and environmental factors at play as well. But I think that when talking about, what causes a person to have a particular sexual orientation, it's really important to note, to remember that, sexual orientation is not a choice, right? Whatever your sexual orientation is, it's not something you choose, and it's not something you can change. Non-straight sexual orientations are not mental disorders, and there is nothing wrong with you if you are LGBTQIA+. There's nothing wrong with not having a non-straight or there's nothing wrong with having a not straight sexual orientation, okay? And any sort of therapies aimed at changing a person's sexual orientation are not only ineffective, but they're very harmful and very traumatizing. If I could leave you with anything in this video, it's that conversion therapy is never the answer. So if you are struggling to come to terms with your sexual orientation, with your sexual identity, please do not seek out conversion therapy, okay? It's so traumatizing. It's so harmful. And it's also ineffective. It's not going to work. So you're going to put yourself through all of this trauma for nothing. If you are having trouble with accepting, your sexual orientation, do seek out a real LGBTQ plus affirmative therapist, a real therapist, okay? Real therapy can be really helpful. Conversion therapy is not. Please do not do that. Conversion therapy is illegal in some places in the United States. It is also illegal in some countries outside of the United States. I know Germany just became the most recent country actually to make conversion therapy illegal. But please just remember, conversion therapy is never the answer. You are valid, you are good, no matter what your orientation is, okay? Okay, so back from my little tangent here, let's get back to talking about what sexual orientation is. Sort of, to sum things up, sexual orientation is who you're sexually attracted to, what gender or genders you're sexually attracted to, if any at all. It's, both a descriptor of who you're attracted to and an identity based on those attractions, okay? So maybe you are attracted to males, maybe you're attracted to females, maybe you're attracted to both males and females, maybe you are attracted to all genders, or you don't care about what gender someone is, or maybe you're not sexually attracted to anyone. All of those things describe various different various different sexual orientations, okay? And I'll have separate videos about what each of those are. So you may be thinking about that list and be sitting there like, well, Emily, that's a lot of options. How do I know what my sexual orientation is? And that's a great question. And unfortunately, it's not one that I have the answer to for you. I can't tell you your sexual orientation. That's something that only you can decide for yourself. No one can decide your sexual orientation for you or label you. That's something you have to decide on your own. But if it is something you're struggling with, seeing a therapist to sort of talk about defining your sexual orientation, your sexuality, can be really helpful. Some people know their whole lives what their sexual orientation is, right? They've known since they were kids that they were straight or gay or something else, But some people really struggle with, figuring out what identity fits them. It's hard for them to find a label that, really matches their experience of sexual attraction. And I think a great place to start is just learning about different sexual orientations, different identities, because then you can sort of be like, oh, that sounds like me, or that doesn't sound like me at all. You can be like, oh, like that's what it means to be gay. Like I have those experiences with sexual attraction. That sounds like that's me. Or you can hear, oh, this is what it means to be pansexual. Like that is not something I experience at all. That's definitely, not what I am. And it can kind of help you to narrow things down a little bit. So just beginning to even educate yourself about different identities can be really helpful. So hopefully this video series will be a little bit helpful to you if you are struggling to define your sexual orientation. In talking about sexual orientation and defining who you are, picking an identity, it's important to note that sexual orientation isn't a static concept. It doesn't have to stay the same your whole life. It can be fluid, it can change. And there's nothing wrong with labeling yourself as, something, or, taking on an identity or deciding that a particular identity fits you, and then one day realizing that that identity doesn't fit anymore and maybe something else fits better. You could go your whole life with your sexual orientation as one thing. It never changes. It stays the same. You never pick a different identity. That's totally great. That's perfect. But it's also okay if one day you wake up and you're like, that doesn't describe my experience with sexual attraction as accurately as it could, or in the most description, or in the best way possible. Just because you choose a particular label or you identify with a particular label or orientation doesn't mean you have to identify with that orientation your whole life. It's okay if one day you wake up and realize something has changed. It doesn't invalidate the identity you had before, and it doesn't mean that you were lying. Sexuality is a fluid concept, and it doesn't necessarily stay the same across the lifetime. Some people have a particularly difficult time identifying with a particular label, finding an orientation that they find really describes their experience of sexual attraction. Those people may choose to just simply label themselves as queer, or they may choose to not take on a sexual orientation label at all, which is totally fine. If you find, nothing really captures my experience of sexual attraction, my experience of sexuality, you don't have to label yourself, Another reason that people can kind of struggle to define their sexual orientation is because we often receive so many messages, particularly in American and Western culture, that being heterosexual, being straight is the best way to be. It's the only way to be. It's the right way to be. And if you're anything else, that's wrong, that's bad, that's dirty. And all of those things are simply not true. But we hear those messages, and it can make it difficult for us to, publicly embrace a non-straight sexual orientation, or to even privately, identify with a non-straight sexual orientation. The homophobic and heterocentric attitudes of most cultures, including American culture, really can make sorting out your sexual orientation difficult. And, if you've spent your whole life, receiving messages that being straight is the only way to be, it's the best way to be, and, you feel like, well, that doesn't describe my experience with attraction. I experience sexual attractions to people that are the same gender of me, or I don't experience sexual attraction at all, or I experience sexual attraction to, any gender. It can be really hard to accept that or come to terms with that, because you've spent your whole life being told that being straight was the way, so homophobia and heterocentric bias can really become internalized and can really put a lot of pressure on us to identify as straight even if we're not. And so it can make sorting out your sexual orientation, your sexual identity, really difficult. But I want you to know that if you are in the place where you're trying to define your sexual orientation, and if you're struggling with that for whatever reason, I just want you to know that it's okay, and there's no rush. You don't have to figure it out today. You don't have to figure it out tomorrow, next week, next year. It doesn't matter. There's no rush, and you can take your time, and whatever you decide to identify with, it's valid, it's good. If you change it sometime down the line, that's valid, that's good too. I also want to say that it can be really helpful to see a therapist, particularly one who specializes in LGBTQIA+ issues, or who is LGBT+ affirmative or gender affirmative, to talk about any struggles you're having with your with defining your sexual orientation, or with coming to terms with your sexual orientation or gender identity, or maybe to talk about experiences of discrimination and bias you have due to your sexual orientation or gender identity, or even just to talk about stuff that's not related to your sexual orientation at all. Seeing a therapist can be really helpful, and it can be really helpful to have someone to talk through things with. So I'll put a link in the description box down below for the GLMA directory of affirmative healthcare providers, LGBT affirmative healthcare providers. They have this great little directory. You can kind of put in some information about where you live and stuff like that, and it will pull up a list of healthcare providers that have registered on their site as LGBT+ affirmative. So there's doctors, there's OBGYNs, there's therapists. It's a really cool little directory. So I'll put a link for that in the description box down below, and I will also put a link for Psychology Today's Find a Therapist tool, particularly for LGBT+ affirmative therapists. The other thing you can do if you're just doing your own research is you can sort of check to see if a therapist mentions on their website or in their bio that they are LGBT+ affirmative, or that they are gender affirming in their bio. You also can ask them when you call to make your appointment, and if they say that they're not someone you want to be seeing. Okay, you only want to see people that are going to be accepting of your identity, knowledgeable about your identity, and that will help you through this process. Okay. One last thing before we move on with sort of summing up what sexual orientation is, but you do not have to have had a sexual experience to define your sexual orientation. So whether you identify as gay, straight, pan, bi, asexual, you don't have to have had sex to know what your sexual orientation is. And if you identify as a LGBT+ orientation or LGBT+ orientation, you don't have to have had sex with a person of the same gender, or just to identify as gay or straight. So sex is not required to know your sexual orientation, regardless of how you identify. So I just think that's important to note. As well, because some people can kind of feel like, well, I haven't been with, a woman, how could I know that I'm lesbian? Well, you don't have to have been with a woman. If you experience sexual attraction to someone, then you experience sexual attraction to them. Sexual orientation only describes your sexual attractions to people. It doesn't describe the behaviors you engage in necessarily because of those attractions, okay? Alright, so I think we have a pretty good definition of what sexual orientation is. So now I think we can start talking about the sexual orientations themselves. That's going to be what a majority of these videos are about, but I just wanted to take the time to define sexual orientation so that we knew what it was that we were talking about. Many people know that being straight or being heterosexual means that a person is attracted or sexually attracted to people of a different gender than themselves, or of the opposite gender. So it's going to be males attracted to females and females attracted to males. Obviously, in these video series, we will be talking about LGBT plus identities, so non-straight, non-heterosexual identities. So before we sort of get going with the rest of the video series, I want to just take a minute and sort of put a word to each letter in the LGBTQIA+ acronym. That way when you hear me say it or someone else say it, you see it on a website, you know what each of those letters stands for. Even if you don't know what that orientation is yet, that's okay. I'm going to have videos about those later. But I just think it's good to sort of be able to give a word to each of those letters so that you're not like, oh, confused when you see it. Because it can be a lot to start learning about, sexuality for the first time especially. There's, a lot of new words and terms, and it can be a little overwhelming, so I'm trying to make each of these videos sort of short, concise, so that, it's not too much information at once, because it's a lot of new stuff for some people, for a lot of people. So anyway, so we're going to talk about the acronym and then we'll move on. So LGBTQIA+. So the L stands for lesbian. The G stands for gay. Sometimes you'll see the G and the L flipped. It's fine. The B stands for bisexual. The T stands for transgender, which is a gender identity we'll talk more about later, and what gender identity is later as well. Let's see, LGBTQ stands for questioning or for queer. It can stand for either or for both. The I stands for intersex, which is another gender identity. And the A stands for asexual. Then finally the plus. What does the plus mean? The plus is just there to encompass all other sexual orientations, romantic orientations, and gender identities that are sort of not heterosexual, not heteroromantic, and not cisgender. And if you don't know what any of those words mean, that's okay. We're going to be talking about all of them in future videos, so stay tuned. It's alright, you're in the right place. But now you know what that acronym stands for, so when you hear people say it, you know what all those letters are. Without further ado, we can move on to talking about the G in LGBTQIA+. So the G in LGBTQ+ stands for gay. A lot of people, I feel like, are familiar with this identity, but gay describes a sexual orientation in which a person is attracted to someone of the same gender as themselves. So it's going to be, a man who's attracted to other men, a woman who's attracted to other women. Some women may prefer the term lesbian, which is an identity we will talk more about tomorrow, but today we're just going to be talking about and defining gay. So same-sex attraction is sometimes referred to as homosexuality as opposed to heterosexuality. So homo means same, so homosexuality is just same-sex attraction, where heterosexuality, hetero means different or other, so it's just attraction to different genders, other gender than oneself. So you may hear the word homosexuality or homosexual used when talking about same-sex sexual attraction. Some people may prefer the word homosexual to the word gay, particularly if they are older, and some people may not like that word at all. Some people may not like the word homosexual at all because it can sometimes have more of a negative or a clinical connotation. So some people really don't like that word. So it's just sort of important sometimes to be careful with the words we use. And to make sure that we are using words that people are comfortable with and that they feel most accurately describes their identity. Just had a little light come on. Sorry. But sort of to sum things up, someone who identifies as gay experiences sexual attraction to people that are the same gender as themselves. And they also will often primarily have sexual relationships with people that are the same gender as themselves as well. And that's it. That's the gay identity. So I feel like this one takes a little bit less defining because I think people are familiar with what it means to be gay, and it's a little bit, I don't want to say more straightforward than some of the other ones, but it takes a little bit less explaining. So this explanation or definition was maybe a little bit shorter than some of my other ones will be, which is why I put it in conjunction with introducing what sexual orientation was. But in tomorrow's video, we're going to talk more about the lesbian identity, so females that are attracted to other females. And then we will go from there and talking about various identities. But I hope that this was helpful to you, and if you're feeling like, well, Emily, you definitely could have talked more about discrimination or prejudice against, you know, gay and lesbian people. You could have talked more about homophobia. I am going to have a separate video on homophobia and on heterosexism, so, but I didn't want to put it in this video and have it be too much information, so there will be a separate video for that coming later. But for now, we are just going to end it here, and I hope that this video was helpful, that maybe you learned something. I will put the links that I mentioned for helping to find LGBT plus affirmative therapist in the description box below, and I also will have links to the Trevor Project's Crisis and Suicide Hotline, as well as to some other crisis hotlines as well, and additional resources in general. So, you know, just know that if you are considering suicide, please do call a crisis hotline or call 911. You are worth it, and suicide is never the answer. I hope that everyone enjoyed this video. Comment down below if there are any other videos you would like for me to make, or any questions that you feel like you could have answered about today's video, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.